Hi, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us for this latest Rootwurks webinar, How to Prevent Allergens and Safeguard Your Company. My name is Ben Hartman. I'm the content manager here at Rootwurks, and I'll be your host for this webinar today. So food allergens, as you probably know, affect millions of Americans across the country and are actually the leading cause of food safety recalls. But even without any sort of recalls, they pose a real danger to very many people across the country and throughout the world, and including potentially yourself or some people that you love or work with. So definitely something that food companies of all sorts need to take very seriously. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is some of the ways that some of the steps people can take to reduce some of these risks and hopefully prevent some of these incidents. And to help make sense of it, we've got an expert here with us today. So we'll go ahead and introduce her. Betsy Craig is the CEO and founder of MenuTrinfo and co-chair of the Food Allergen Committee for the Conference for Food Protection. She's also recognized as one of the nation's top experts of food allergies and is the co-chair of the Food Allergen Committee for the Conference for Food Protection. And also in 2024 was appointed co-chair of the Fair Pact Alliance Hospitality Industry Council. Hi, Betsy. How's it going?
Hi. Good to see you, Ben.
Yeah, great to see you too. It's a bit of a long bio and intro, but definitely you've got a lot of experience in this world of allergies. So that's why that's great. That's why you're here today. So I guess how big is the threat or the concern in America? People, I think maybe who don't have a food allergen themselves or their children might not realize it, or they might just think of it just in terms of, peanuts, don't bring a peanut butter sandwich to school. But how big is it? How big is this issue?
It's a great question. The epidemic of food allergies in the country has grown rapidly at just an alarming rate. And when I started in the business back in 2010, 2011, the numbers of those in food allergies was under 10 million. And a study came out in about 2011 that we were at 15 million people just in the US with food allergies. And then we saw a new study kick out at the end of 2018, 2019 that upped it to 32 million plus. It's being quoted now regularly as 33 million people in the country have a food allergy. And by the way, that doesn't just affect them, that affects families, family members. So they say about 85 million Americans pay attention to what's on the label, what's on the menu when it comes to food allergies for themselves or someone in their family or that they love. So it went from being like 1 out of every 10, 1 out of every 20 to being 2 out of every 10.
Wow. And I guess one way, or maybe a better way to look at it, is it's not in terms of the number of people who individually have a food allergen, it's more how many households have to deal with it, because the parents or the spouse or everybody has to always have their eyes open and always be on the lookout. So it's more.
Yep, absolutely. Food's love. It's not supposed to hurt, and it sure does hurt. And schools, like you said, no peanut butter. Schools used to never have regulations. I think my daughter would have starved to death if I couldn't have sent her in with peanut butter and jelly, just to be quite frank. I was a single mom and it's what I gave her. But the bottom line is today, 2 or 3 kids in every single classroom have a life-threatening anaphylactic peanut or tree nut allergy or dairy allergy, some kind of food allergy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do think also myself as a kid, I probably would have starved also because it was just the default for parents. And there wasn't, I don't think, a real concern or awareness for most people, as far as I know, as far as I remember. And then when we were talking recently about this, you mentioned also that it was a pretty worrisome stat. It was something like the majority of people who develop a new allergy, it's later on in life in adulthood.
Yeah, that's been the uptick, honestly, Ben. We've seen more people get diagnosed later in life recently than the younger. It used to be children were the ones that had the food allergies. In the last decade or so, it's adults. It's almost like our bodies are filled up with shrimp and we no longer can have shellfish. Or we're filled up with tree nuts and we're done. Or we see it all the time with people with gluten. All of a sudden they get celiac disease at 50 years old in their, and boom, they could eat pasta every meal. And then they hit a threshold, they hit a point which just stops for them. So that is definitely the higher diagnosed segment of our country in the last few years is the adult population over 18.
And it's something, maybe counterintuitive because people so often, associate it with children in school or when you're a kid and you're taken for that allergy test and they hit you on the back with all those little things. But actually it's more likely adults. And I think there was another, I want to use the word scary, but you mentioned something like when somebody does discover a new allergy, maybe a quarter of them happen outside of the house. They're not home. They're not somewhere where they're maybe able to deal with it as easily. Definitely. So, I mean, I think it highlights a little bit how, if places aren't prepared and something does happen, that it's potentially more dangerous than people realize.
I personally do a lot of pushing for stock epinephrine, meaning epinephrine devices at locations that serve food where the prescription is not attached to an individual. It's attached to the building, similar to an AED or a Narcan, so that you have a device that's available if, God forbid, somebody all of a sudden starts reacting to shrimp and they've never had a food allergy before, so they wouldn't carry an epinephrine device. And sometimes you need to epi fast and epi first. And if you don't have an EpiPen or an epi device, you're in trouble. And now you don't necessarily need a needle, a pen. There's one you actually can inhale through the nostril that gets you epinephrine instantly and starts to reverse the onset of anaphylaxis, which can be lethal very quickly.
And it needs to be administered right away, right? That's
absolutely. Epi first, epi fast.
Because I remember, I don't know when I first started to see defibrillators a lot, but it wasn't, at some point I started to see them. And I think if something is growing and potentially could be considered an epidemic, it would make sense to adjust and make, colleges, schools, offices. In terms of the allergens, there's something is it the big 9 or does that number change in terms of some things come on and off the list?
So there are top 9 allergens here in the US. We added sesame about 18 months ago. It was top 8 forever. Like from when they first started calling it out through the legislation in DC, it was the big 9, top 9, major 9, something like that. But here in the US, it's top 8. Now it's 9. Canada is 14. Europe is 11. Ultimately, we have 35 different countries that call out up to 23 different allergens across the world.
Wow. So when we were talking about this recently, you were talking about how it's not a matter of it's not cross-contamination, it's contact when they talk about.
We changed the word.
Which I think is smart because it just makes you look at it a little bit different. It's just contact, pure and simple. What does that entail, I guess, and what does that usually look like? Somebody brought something in they weren't supposed to, or is it just, it's endless?
Well, to dig into just for a second, if you don't mind,
sure,
why we call it contact versus contamination. With contamination, a lot of stuff with foodborne illness, a lot of things can be cooked out, or if somebody just shows up to work healthy, or if they use good, safe food safety protocol, they're good to go. When it comes to allergens, it doesn't matter how long you cook a specific allergen. If somebody's allergic to, let's say it's a weird one, like they're allergic to poultry. Well, if you cook chicken on a flat top, I don't care if you cook it for 2 hours and it tastes like shoe leather, it's always the protein chicken. So the person allergic to poultry or chicken is still going to react. With contamination, you can cook out sometimes the challenges. So contact is where an allergen-containing ingredient hits a non-allergen containing ingredient and can be done on cold, can be done during food processing, can be done on the truck and receiving, can be done in storage, on the plates, remnants on a fork, on a plate. There's a lot of opportunity for contact to happen. So that's why the term, and we've been using that as an industry for since 2011, 12, somewhere in there.
That makes sense, because it's also, I think it reinforces the idea also that you can't cook it out. You can't be like, well, it's like you would for some, dangerous potential organism or something that just, get it to a certain temperature and you're good. But no, this is, I guess it just kind of gets in your head. It's got to be gone, period. So how does a place, I guess when you go to places and you're looking to see how they're doing with preventing contact, what does a place that's doing the right thing look like? Are people wearing different coded, maybe uniforms, or they're knowing not to bring something from one place to another? Is it a real separation?
It's a major separation in CPG manufacturing. So if we're going to make food that's allergy safe or allergy friendly, we need to have protocols in place, like clean lines, ways to clean the line, ways to test to make sure the lines are clean. There are definitely manufacturing facilities that I've been in where they do have different color-coded jackets or smocks or aprons and gloves. That's really, really normal. In a commercial kitchen, they have designated smallwares you would use to prepare a meal for somebody highly allergic, or even not highly allergic, just allergic to an allergen. So the light color purple, that's actually the color of my nails right now. A nice pastel purple is the color we use for food allergy smallwares. So from cutting boards to chef knives to specific pans to that storage containers with purple writing on the side so they can stay allergen free. All of that has been developed, especially over the last decade, to call out what is safe. Again, watching people with food allergies more than double in a few short years has caused for the need for solution in the back of the house in a kitchen, as well as manufacturing certified free from allergens, making sure the protocol is in place, the allergen control plan is in place. And I know we'll get into some of that in a bit, but those are just good, the 5,000-foot view of two different examples of where it matters and how it matters.
What about, I guess, in terms of manufacturing, but also in restaurants and whatnot, where you have, outside suppliers, you have a supply chain, people you're dealing with. How can you try to assure that they're also doing what they're supposed to do? Or is that?
Yeah. So MenuTrinfo started as a menu labeling company, and we do allergen charts for restaurants, and we're real picky about who we take on. But the companies we work with, we help make charts. So the charts are what allergens are contained in what menu items. And we sort of reverse engineer that. We go back and find out what flour they're using, if they're using flour, what breadcrumb mix if they're using. So each ingredient, is it free from the allergen? So then we tag it as contains or doesn't contain an allergen. And then we really encourage all people in food to go through some level of training, associate level, manager level, manufacturer level, to train how not to have the cross contact so that the food is safe from loading dock to tabletop. That's one of our phrases. We want to make sure when it comes off a truck, it comes into the back of your house, and by the time I eat it at your table, it's safe. Another kitschy saying that my husband came up with in 2011, right after we started this business, he said, we got to teach people how to keep the hospital out of hospitality. And I was like, yes, we do. That is why we live, bud. And we're still doing it almost 15 years later.
Yeah, come to think of it, people don't usually want to see the word hospital either. No. I think pretty much in general. And so how much of it is just kind of, I guess, when dealing with like suppliers and things that are coming in, is it about having really good systems in place that to trace things and to trace, like, we got this from that guy and we know that we can trust this supplier, and just like keeping everything really well recorded?
Yeah, and that's mandated a lot more now through legislation, and what's coming into play for food safety is being able to trace and track. Absolutely. Vetted suppliers, vetted ingredients, making sure, you're ordering what you need to order that's safe, and then making sure it's safe as it comes through the door. I'll tell you, some of the really smart ones in food service are doing, I was just learning about this and talking to somebody in the last week. They're going with, like, we have a certified free from flour we recommend, and they use our certification, and that's great, which means the flour is gluten-free and it's free from all 9. There's a campus, a college campus, that's going to use that flour for everything. It's the only flour they're going to buy. So that flour, it doesn't matter what it's in, it's always free from. So that is a great solution long-term for that campus to not worry about flour containing an allergen, because they're using a certified flour through everything. So there's solves like that I'm starting to see get some weight and depth to it.
Yeah. What about when you were talking about how I think the figure was around or almost 50% of recalls had to do with allergens, and you were saying it's largely because of labeling, or maybe even primarily because of labeling. What does that mean in terms of allergens? Like that they're omitting what they should put on, or they're not telling the truth about it potentially?
So from the CPG, the manufacturing side of the business, more than 50% of all recalls are based on undeclared allergens. That's what we see come up. And more than half of those have to do with improper labeling. So the allergen control plan is in place, but maybe not being followed to the letter. Or somebody just simply grabs an old label and uses an old label for a cookie when a new label has been developed and is there, or they maybe need to develop it, but they haven't done it yet. So it's a labeling issue. So food goes out and might not be called out that it contains dairy, and then they have to do this recall because all of a sudden it has dairy. We've seen it recently with massive amounts of frozen dessert treat. We see it all the time, and unfortunately, we see it all the time. And so, proper labeling. The question on the screen is how important is proper labeling for allergen safety? It's 100% of the challenges, honestly, that could be avoided.
Mm-hmm. But because because ultimately, what else does the consumer have to look at or to count on, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
right.
And it's often it's often things that are counterintuitive, or maybe something that you wouldn't assume would have, I don't know, milk in it or nuts. You mentioned, we were talking just before this about the FDA and this I don't know if it was a recall, or there was something about dairy and chocolate bars, and that was
not a recall. Yeah, but a study and a sampling. So FDA did two different samplings, and I'll just go off on this for a sec. They did a sampling of chocolate in 2018, 2019, produced the results in 2020. And out of, and I have the numbers written down so I don't misrepresent this, out of 171 total samples, 10%, 16 of them contained dairy. They all said dairy-free in the cute little fonts. Nobody was certified dairy-free. They all just said dairy-free. And 16 out of 171 contain dairy. And we use ppm in this country for gluten-free. They found up to between 600 and 3,100 ppm in those 16 products that were labeled dairy-free that in fact contain dairy. They redid this test in 2022, just produced the results on the 17th of September. So officially the results were produced yesterday. Can't get much more cutting edge than that for FDA, but 210 samples, out of it, 13, so about 6%, came up with dairy, even though they had cute little dairy-free. This is dairy-free chocolate. But 13 of them did contain dairy. 12 had 20 ppm or less. One of the items had over 1,000 ppm. That's parts per million. So that's a lot of dairy in a product that's labeled as dairy-free, and the consumer's trusting that cute little dairy-free label. It explains to me why certified free from is becoming more popular, because testing for allergens and making sure there are 5 ppm or less in any product is as close as we're going to come to free from.
I think you mentioned also in terms of dairy, that's the one that has the most hospitalizations, or is the most potentially dangerous of all the allergens?
No, that's actually the most lethal. So peanuts actually has the most hospitalizations. We see more people end up in the ER with peanut as the allergen, the culprit, if you will. But dairy is just horribly lethal. There was a study done by a PhD instructor, teacher, educator out in London, and he's done 2 different studies around it, and both times he's come back with dairy is the most lethal. It is one that we see regularly in the headlines. Somebody goes to have a pancake and ends up not coming home because they had a pancake, because pancake contained dairy and the server didn't realize. Or I talk about Thomas's son all the time, 3-year-old boy, daycare, goes and He's got a dairy allergy, not a problem. We got it covered. You can go to work. And he goes to work, and that Wednesday, somebody feeds his child a grilled cheese sandwich because they didn't understand cheese had dairy in it, and that little boy didn't make it. A lot of laws and things being changed as a result of his passing, but a horrible way for me to make a nice friend and his father, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I think also, well, it's just people, when they think about dairy, they don't, I imagine the majority of people probably wouldn't guess that it's the most lethal.
Right.
I think people, they may, in terms of just the average person who maybe doesn't have an issue, might think, at worst case, it's somebody might be lactose intolerant, get a tummy ache. But I think we're just more geared towards like, peanuts, tree nuts, things like that. But yeah, I mean, that definitely put it in perspective for me a little bit. Like, things that maybe, even people who really pay attention don't always realize how much something is potentially dangerous. In terms of that mislabeling, it seems like there's kind of two types, like a failure to say that something, that it may contain a certain thing. And then a sort of, I would say like falsifying, but putting something like, nut-free or milk-free, like a stamp on it that looks nice, like you're saying, like a pretty little stamp with a nice font, but doesn't actually have any sort of weight behind it. It's not an actual, like a seal from, the government or something. How common is that? People play kind of fast and loose with it a little bit?
So full disclosure, I am the designer of Certified Free From in this country and in this world. I'm the one who came up with it. I'm the one that launched it. My company is behind it. I believe in certification. I believe in in-person audits. I believe in mandatory testing. And I believe in, ISO standards. What we're seeing in the food allergy space is what we used to see in the gluten space. 20 years ago, people put gluten-free on anything they wanted to and had to prove it to nobody. And then retailers actually came out and said, no more just gluten-free on the label. You have to prove it's gluten-free. You have to have it certified. And we are starting to hear that around allergens because some of the retailers know about us now. And so they're saying to the products that have peanut-free or dairy-free, you know what, we want to keep buying your products from you, or we want you to keep private labeling for us. But we don't want those soft, they call them soft claims. They're made up by the marketing department. They might be true, but there's no weight or depth behind it. And that's where the certification lets the consumer see the seal, and you don't have to dissect the label. The label's very clear. It shouldn't contain the allergen. It shouldn't have a may contain, might contain, or any one of the 31 different variations of precautionary allergy labeling statements I've seen. It shouldn't have any of that on the label. It should show that the ingredient doesn't include your allergen and has a certified free from your allergen on the package. Then you don't have to wonder if you got to call the factory and talk to somebody and see how they sound, or what was your experience the last 4 times? Have they changed anything? There's got to be truth in what we're putting on packaging. And some of these soft claims I'm not saying they're untruthful or not truthful. What I am saying is there's a better way to do it. And in full disclosure, I know I invented that better way, but I still think it's a better way to do it.
Yeah. No, there needs to be something, something that everyone can trust and know is like official and legit.
Right.
Tend to looking at a package, it can be easy to just think like, oh, it says, such and such, and not know if that's actually, how much weight is behind that, whatever that declaration is on the package. So, and if it's something that's potentially like a life and death issue, I think you mentioned that some people, they'll maybe make the decision whether or not to try something based on when they call how informed the person on the other end of the line sounded. They sounded like they knew what they were doing.
Yes.
And they said there's no nuts, so let's try it, but that's not the way you want people operating, especially not with, families, kids, things like that. When you talk about an allergen plan, I think you mentioned it in passing in the beginning. What does it look like on the ground? Like, what does it take for a company, or let's say a restaurant? I guess it depends on the size, but let's say, average company wants to get an allergen plan going because they don't want to, they don't want anybody getting hurt.
Well, in a restaurant, every restaurant should have a plan and a policy when it comes to food allergies. Some restaurants, and I've seen signage to this effect, have a sign on the wall that says, "We can accommodate no allergens. We invite you to dine elsewhere." And I really have seen that more times than I wish. However, the people that understand hospitality is feeding all humans, and that understand a food allergy is a disability. So telling
Hmm.
them, "Sorry, Charlie," isn't necessarily the right answer. You need to come up with a plan. And the plan is, it starts from the loading. How are you going to order? It starts from menu creation. Executive chefs, smart chefs, concept chefs, um, they know how to make amazing food. Challenging them to make amazing food safe when somebody's allergic to certain items is super helpful. Now, I said there's the big nine in the country. 90% of people have an allergy to one of those nine. So trying to have menu items that don't contain any of the nine gives you a really easy go-to in your restaurant for somebody coming in with one or nine of the big nine. There's different allergies others have that aren't part of the big nine. There's 10% of folks have something other than the big nine. So you have to accommodate. But having a plan about how you order, how you tag it, how you store it, how you prepare it, and how it gets delivered to the table. Those are sort of the key areas in a restaurant. There's a few more areas in manufacturing. Happy to go into those, but in a restaurant, those are the five keys.
Hmm. You said with manufacturing, is it also like a training component, like making sure, I don't know, once every few months or at a certain cadence, people, you know, refresh this training about that?
Absolutely, absolutely. Training is one of the steps in the nine. I have a nine-step with the allergy control plan for manufacturing, and the last one is training and labeling,
Hmm.
because you got to train people how to make sure the labels are done right. So you have to train people how to do all the different steps. But the steps are. Do you want me to run through those now? Is now a good time for that?
Yeah, I think
Because when
also,
you're looking,
I was
go
gonna
ahead.
say we could probably also send a list of those to folks who watched afterwards if
Sure,
they want to have it.
sure, absolutely. Um, I call it a nine-step, and training is kind of the umbrella it all sits under. But receiving, storage, receiving ingredients that you ordered, storing ingredients properly and based on allergen-free, segregated over allergen-containing items could just be done on shelves. We see that all the time. Scheduling the runs, again, CPG, your manufacturer, when are you running your food, and are you running allergen-free food on a line that is clean first thing in the morning? Or are you having to flip the line around and clean in between? And then actually doing the run. What's entailed? What does it entail when you go do the actual run of an allergy-free product? What's your policy and procedure on rework? Do you do rework? If something does get an allergen in it, what do you do with the product? Is it trashed? Is it donated? Is it changed and labeled as something else, or can it be reworked? The sixth step I do is maintenance and engineering. Like, what are we doing to maintain those lines, the safety of those lines, the safety of the storage? Seventh is sanitation. How are we cleaning up at the end of the day to kick off the next day? If most of the facilities we're in here are either all allergen free, or they do contain allergens, but they run allergen free food first, usually in a day. So how are they cleaning the night before so that when someone comes in, they're good to go? The eighth step is really huge, and it's called validation. And it could be as simple as lateral flow devices, which we all learned exactly what those are thanks to COVID.
Hmm.
The old pregnancy test, but now we all know the COVID test. Just simple swab tests, or do we have the ability to be more intricate in our testing? But how do we validate what we're doing is right? And the ninth is labeling and training. So, do we have the label done properly, and how do we keep our personnel up to follow all those other 8 steps successfully?
Mhm. And from what I imagined, it's not a static sort of thing. In other words, like, it may need to be changes made as time goes by. New ingredients come in, new SKUs, new things like that. So an allergy plan is not like it's not a one and done thing, right? It's not a.
No, it can't be. It's got to be a living, breathing document. And we bring in a new item, we do a new SKU. a restaurant, we add 2 new appetizers. We decide, Jack Daniel's barbecue flavor is what we're doing for all our new burgers. So now we've got a whole new, or we're doing a Dorito thing, or we're doing that sort of. It doesn't matter what your business is. I was talking to somebody yesterday who's involved in cannabis world, heavily involved in cannabis world with edibles, and there's big, huge concerns about that because guess what? 2 out of every 10 need to watch what they're eating. Doesn't matter what they're eating, they got to watch it. So all of it, and when we introduce new items, when we introduce new menu items, when we introduce new grab and go, a restaurant makes barbecue sauce. That's great. I keep going to barbecue today. Maybe it's close to lunch. Sorry about that. But are we telling folks, hey, this barbecue sauce is safe for anybody to eat? Or, hey, most commercial barbecue sauces have tree nuts in it. So do these have tree nuts? All that.
Absolutely. And what is the, I guess, what do you see as the role of management in this? Do you find, I wouldn't say pushback, but are they sometimes maybe a feeling like, we don't, this is so involved, or there's so much to this, or why would we have milk? How would you, what's been your experience?
So management will buy in and do whatever it takes to support it if they know somebody personally that has a food allergy. Or they happen to watch the news where we had a 25-year-old dancer pass away from eating a cookie over the holidays last year, and it hit all the national news. So when it becomes personal, there's no problem. Let's get people trained. Let's have protocol. Let's have policy. Manufacturers know it's a good idea, or they wouldn't have dairy-free to begin with on their chocolate. They wouldn't have peanut-free on their crackers. They know the consumer wants it. The challenge is whether to substantiate that claim and back it up with the certification, or keep calling it out as a good idea. And I just see us going more and more. I mean, if COVID taught us anything, we want third-party certification on everything we can as consumers to feel assurance that somebody else is in there looking at things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wonder if, well, it just got me thinking if some of any of these new guidelines or new precautions people started taking during the pandemic, if that had a positive effect in the sense with allergens, maybe people paying more close attention to, is that something that you found?
Yes, it had a marked effect in washing our hands, wearing gloves, a lot of protocol we were supposed to be doing already. It also, the pandemic had a different effect with those with food allergies. We're seeing right after the pandemic, we saw an uptick of people getting diagnosed with food allergies because they started eating out and away from their home, which they had been in for 6, 12, 18 months. So now they were getting introduced to foods or food articles or particles they weren't used to eating and having a reaction. So it kind of was a double-edged sword. We got some good wins from it. I love that everybody washes their hands now.
Right.
So that I'll take that as a win. And that matters with food allergies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So on some level, it's just kind of just the basics.
Yeah.
Washing your hands, sanitation, things like that. What about like specific tools of the trade in terms of the things that maybe frontline workers or management can use to help, I guess, for training or just like for studying about allergens and finding them in the workplace? Or is it just,
well, the first tool you can use is communication. Do we have an allergy button? Are we using it? Do we have an app? I have one restaurant that we do work with, and they staple a card to every check that has a food allergy attached to it. Another one uses a red Sharpie. Another one uses 3 methods of communication. They type it into their POS. They use something along the lines of a card system, and they verbally tell the chef. Because communication can't be relied on just one method. It will fail, especially in a busy kitchen on a Saturday night. Another method might be communication through your tools, the tools like menus, charts, allergen charts. There's a million apps out there that identify allergens and menu items. Those are great solutions if they're kept up and not just scraped off the internet, but you actually work with the restaurant to make sure you have the right data. Those tools, as far as gloves, you said different colors. Well, if somebody comes into a restaurant, is highly sensitive, changing gloves and apron at a bare minimum. changing the spoons you're using, opening fresh ingredients. We have some really successful QSR chains that their protocol is when somebody comes in and says, I have a food allergy, but I want a pizza, I want it on gluten-free crust, and I want it made with these 7 ingredients. The staff knows instantly to go get a brand new, fresh gluten-free from the freezer, so nobody's touched anything. And then they open up each of those ingredients and get it from a fresh bag. And that serves the client with it. Just we use a term at MenuTrinfo, deliver confidence. Like deliver the confidence to the table, all the way to the table.
Yeah. If you're more confident in it, then I mean, you project that. It seems like there's two kind of, among other things, kind of two sort of principles with these in terms of allergen control. It's like make things harder to miss and come back over them. You know, in other words, if that means, you know, sticking a sign here, there, everywhere, bright colors, make it really, really obvious. You know, it's sort of like somebody who's always forgetting their keys. You know, just put it right where they're not going to miss them. You know, or something like that. Like make it really. So don't assume that people are going to remember or see, I guess.
No, I have a good example for that. Ben, I've worked on and off with the happiest place on earth down in Florida and California in our business. And what they've done with food allergies is pretty amazing. I do know they have a current case that happened at a property, a restaurant off-site. Leaving that aside, for decades, they have been putting on their doors that all their servers and their staff and their castmates and all that go in and out. And they've been putting a character and just a sentence or two about, have you asked about food allergies? Do any of your guests have a food allergy? Did you check food allergies? Something like that changes every day. The character changes, the font changes, the color changes every day. Somebody's job it is to slip a new 8.5 by 11 in there. We get sign blind. So I can put a food allergy sign up in the back of your house and your people will see it for exactly 2 days. And after that, I don't see it anymore. And when they describe why they did this and the way they did this, I'm like, that is brilliant. Like we do a monthly poster training program for the exact same reason. Every month it's a different poster. We want to keep the training fresh. We want to keep the people fresh, and not reinvent the wheel, but make it easy to make the wheel work.
Yeah, make it easy, hard to miss. Take out any of the take out any guesswork, right? You don't want people.
Yes.
Yes. I think it's like the guesswork would seem to be the enemy of allergen control.
Could be lethal.
And then just, I guess, have like confirmation in place or double check. In other words, it's after you, there's another fail safe. There's another person. After this person, somebody else has to sign off on it. I think.
Yep, we call it second eyes here at MenuTrinfo. Everything we do goes through a second set of eyes.
Oh, it makes perfect sense. And I mean, I imagine anybody watching would probably be somewhat familiar with this, but I guess before we get out of here, what is the cost of something going wrong? I mean, obviously there's somebody getting hurt and there's harm and bodily harm, but even if something isn't really grave in that regard, what can it mean for, let's say, a restaurant to have an incident or a packaged food company that gets publicized?
Okay, so this is going to sound very crass, and I have nothing but all due respect for anybody who's lived with allergies or had an allergy incident, and I have a lot of empathy for brands that have brand-ending incidents. However, settlements and financial numbers do get people's attention, and I do have some real numbers. On average, if someone does not die from a food allergic reaction, you're seeing a settlement between $157,000 and $200,000. If somebody passes away, the settlement starts at about $800,000 and goes into the millions. And some brands are known for it. Some brands never recover. Some small mom and pop shops closed their doors immediately or had to close their doors immediately. And it's especially if a life is taken. Everyone in our industry, in the restaurant industry, if I say the brand name Jack in the Box, you know what I'm talking about. And that is what I mean by it's not necessarily brand ending, but it's impactful forever. And that reputation.
I think Yeah, I remember the Jack in the Box case. It just kind of stayed there.
It did.
It's somewhere
5
in the
kids
back of
were
my head.
lost. I mean, it's crazy.
I mean, I kept eating
Crazy.
there in high school. I'll get you wrong.
Well,
Like, they had the dollar menu.
but,
But
and they learned, but it was a hard way to learn, and we all remember it,
yeah, of
and
course.
that's the part that's just like hard. We don't want to be known as the one that had 18 million boxes of cereal recalled because you made a soft claim you didn't back with accreditation,
Yeah.
but
And
it's out there.
it definitely gets into the public consciousness and just kind of stays there.
Yeah.
No matter what you
Yeah.
do. So definitely, yeah, not something to overlook by any means, to put it lightly. We're going to sign up, but I got an interesting question here, Connie. Allergy certification standards, do they have training requirements in the code?
Oh, yeah.
Um,
You betcha, Connie. We do. There is, we require ANAB accredited training by staff on site and proof of that. And we also have an in-person audit every year. So that accredited training has to be maintained. There's some really good training out there. There's some good base level training. Ben's got something coming out. I mean, that's awesome. I think I'd love 200 training courses out there. I have one, Ben has one, but there are some that are really more robust when it comes to CPG companies that go beyond the basics, but all your people should have basics.
No, absolutely. Well, and now that you mentioned that, I thought before we close, if anybody watching here, first off, if you want to learn more about Rootwurks, come on and just check us out online, rootwurks.com. Also, there's the workshop. That's our online store for all types of training courses and a lot of things to help you keep things safer. One of those is our allergen management training course, which is for specifically for the food safety industry. All types of stuff about helping, reduce the risk of allergen-related incidents, how to identify things before they become a problem, how to keep them from, being present, and how to work with your staff to get on top of that. So definitely come check us out, rootworks.com. Check out the workshop and our allergen management course, and also go ahead and take a walk over to MenuTrinfo and see what Betsy's doing and all the stuff they're doing to help get people safer out there, because this problem is not going away, and seems like it's getting worse. So definitely, one thing we like to say is speak to an expert, and I don't think you can find a better expert than Betsy. So definitely, definitely go check them out, and we'll send out a slide with more info about those the big 9 allergens and some of those 9 steps you said that people can take, because I think that sounds
sure. We just got a good question just popped in.
Oh, that is a good one. So what do you think? Food safety mandatory?
Okay, it's getting mandatory. Guess what's happening? In fact, the next thing I do today is talk about the new food code. So they are mandating training in the new food code. They're mandating labeling in the new food code, training and labeling around allergens. So when I first started, there was barely anything in the food code about food allergies. I have been working for over a decade on seeing some of it show up. So yes, training is now mandated for people in charge. They call them the PICs in the food code. But the 2022 food code has those 3 areas, as well as introducing sesame in there. It's I won't bore you with quoting the specific standard in there, but if you want to hit me up on LinkedIn, I'll make sure to share that with you.
Yeah, if people want to look that up online, where would they go
to? You just look up the new food code 2022. Once it opens up, put in the word food allergen, you'll see all the references.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, that is a little reassuring. Things might be, moving a little bit in the right direction. Definitely, no shortage of people and families that need the help and need to be safer. Betsy, thanks so much for being here today, and thanks to everybody.
Thank you, Ben.
Yeah, definitely, really appreciate your expertise, and we'll see everybody next time. Thanks, guys.